The hall glowed with extravagant light, every surface polished to reflect wealth, power, and carefully curated importance. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen stars above long marble floors, and the low hum of elite conversation floated through the air, stitched together with laughter that sounded practiced rather than genuine. Waiters moved silently between clusters of influential guests, balancing silver trays heavy with rare drinks, while the millionaire stood near the center of it all, effortless in his authority, his presence bending the room toward him. This gala was not just a charity event to him. It was a stage, a place where his reputation was reinforced without him needing to say a word. He had built his empire on sharp instincts and sharper words, and tonight, surrounded by politicians, investors, and cultural elites, he felt untouchable. His eyes drifted across the crowd with mild boredom until they stopped on a man standing near the back, almost invisible in comparison, dressed in a simple suit that carried no obvious label, speaking quietly with a waiter as if they were equals. There was nothing outwardly remarkable about him, yet something about his stillness felt out of place in a room obsessed with performance. A whisper reached the millionaire's ear. Someone murmured that the man was well-educated, perhaps even a scholar. The word amused him. Education without power, he believed, was decoration without purpose. A familiar urge rose inside him, the desire to assert dominance not with money, but with intellect, the kind that silences others and elevates him further in the eyes of the crowd. He lifted his glass slightly, a subtle gesture that immediately drew attention, and the nearby conversation softened, then paused altogether. The millionaire enjoyed this control, the way people instinctively leaned in when he prepared to speak. He addressed the stranger directly, his tone polite on the surface but edged with condescension underneath, as though offering an opportunity rather than issuing a challenge. Then, deliberately, he switched languages, choosing classical Arabic, formal, complex, layered with nuance. It was not a casual choice. He had spent years mastering it, not out of love for the language, but because he knew how it could be used as a tool, a way to expose and embarrass those who claimed knowledge without truly possessing it. His question was beautifully constructed, poetic in structure, but inside it lay a carefully hidden barb, a subtle assumption that placed the listener beneath him. To those who understood Arabic well enough, the insult was clear, and a ripple of restrained amusement moved through the crowd. Some smiled behind their glasses. Others glanced at the stranger with curiosity mixed with pity. This was a game they had seen before, and the outcome was usually the same. The powerful asked, the unprepared faltered, and the room quietly affirmed who belonged at the top. The stranger looked up, meeting the millionaire's gaze without hurry or defensiveness. His face showed no sign of panic, no rush to prove himself, only a calm attentiveness that seemed almost disconnected from the tension thickening the air. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he allowed a brief silence to settle, a pause long enough to feel intentional. In that stillness, the millionaire felt an unexpected flicker of irritation. Silence, after all, was supposed to be his weapon. The man's eyes lowered for a moment, as if he were choosing something carefully, not just words, but intention. Around them, the room held its breath. The chandeliers continued to sparkle. Glasses clinked softly somewhere in the distance, but the center of gravity had shifted. What was meant to be a moment of triumph now hovered uncertainly, suspended between anticipation and doubt. The millionaire tightened his grip on his glass, confident yet strangely alert, unaware that this single question, asked for humiliation, had already begun to unravel the evening he thought he controlled. The silence did not break abruptly. It unfolded, stretching across the hall like a held breath that no one dared release. When the man finally began to speak, his voice was neither loud nor hesitant, but steady, carrying a depth that seemed to ground the space around him. He replied in Arabic, not the stiff, rehearsed form often used to impress, but a living, flowing language shaped by understanding rather than display. From the first sentence, it was clear that he had not merely understood the millionaire's question, he had seen through it. He addressed the surface meaning with ease, answering it accurately and thoughtfully, but then, without altering his tone, he gently turned the structure of the question inside out. The hidden insult dissolved under the weight of clarity, exposed not by confrontation, but by illumination. His words carried references to classical scholars, to poets whose verses spoke of humility and restraint, and to old teachings that warned against confusing knowledge with superiority. Each phrase felt deliberate, yet natural, as though he were not performing for the room, but conversing with the idea itself. Those who understood Arabic fluently felt a quiet shock, the kind that does not announce itself but settles deeply. Forcing reevaluation at AS, he continued. The rhythm of his speech created a subtle shift in the audience. Smiles faded, replaced by attentive stillness. People leaned in not because they were commanded to, but because they wanted to hear more. The man's response did not attack the millionaire directly, yet every sentence gently displaced him from the position of dominance he had assumed. He spoke of language as a trust, not a weapon, explaining how words carry the weight of intention and reveal more about the speaker than the listener. His metaphors were simple but profound, comparing arrogance to a mirror that reflects only the self, while humility opens a window to understanding others. The millionaire felt the change before he fully grasped it intellectually. The room was no longer orbiting around him. Attention had shifted, quietly but decisively, toward the man who spoke without seeking it. The laughter that had once lingered in anticipation was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness that something significant was happening, something unscripted and irreversible. The millionaire's confident smile stiffened, then faltered. He understood Arabic perfectly, which meant he could not hide behind confusion or dismissal. Every word landed with precision, and each one chipped away at the carefully maintained image he had built for years. He had expected hesitation, perhaps a flawed response, or an embarrassed attempt at politeness. What he received instead was a lesson, one delivered without cruelty, yet impossible to ignore. The stranger's tone remained respectful, even kind, but it was precisely that kindness that made the response devastating. There was no anger to dismiss, no insult to counter, only truth presented calmly and without apology. The millionaire became acutely aware of the crowd again, of the eyes watching him not with admiration now, but with curiosity, perhaps even expectation. For the first time in a very long time, he did not know how to reclaim control of a moment. His usual strategies, humor, authority, dismissal, felt suddenly inadequate, almost childish, against the weight of what was being said. As the man concluded his answer, he did not linger or emphasize his final point. He simply allowed the words to settle, trusting their impact to speak for itself. The silence that followed was different from the one before. It was heavier, charged with reflection rather than anticipation. Somewhere in the back of the hall, a guest shifted uncomfortably, breaking the stillness for just a second before it returned. The millionaire lowered his glass slightly, unaware that his posture had changed, that his shoulders no longer carried the same ease. Inside him, something stirred that he did not welcome: recognition. He realized that his question, meant to reduce another man, had instead revealed the limits of his own power. Knowledge, he now saw, could not be owned or wielded like wealth. It responded only to sincerity. And as he stood there, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt ornamental, he understood that the answer he had provoked had already stripped him of words, even before he had tried to speak. The atmosphere in the hall shifted in a way that could not be undone, as if an invisible line had been crossed, and there was no returning to the easy confidence that once filled the space. Conversations that had paused now refused to resume, hovering instead at the edge of awareness, because no one wanted to be the first to break the spell. The millionaire stood motionless, his mind racing, yet oddly empty of responses. He had faced market crashes, ruthless negotiations, and public scrutiny without flinching, but this moment unsettled him more deeply than any financial loss ever could. The man before him had not challenged his wealth or his status directly, yet somehow those things now felt fragile, exposed under a light he had not anticipated. He became acutely aware of his own breathing, of the weight of his tailored suit, of how small these symbols of power felt when measured against the calm certainty he had just witnessed. Around him, the guests sensed his hesitation, and in that hesitation, they sensed vulnerability, a rare sight in a man who had built his reputation on being unshakable. The stranger remained where he was, hands relaxed at his sides, his expression unchanged, as though he had merely answered a simple question and nothing more. There was no triumph in his eyes, no satisfaction in having impressed anyone. That absence of pride unsettled the millionaire further. He realized that what he had encountered was not competition, but independence, someone entirely unaffected by the hierarchy that governed this room. The man spoke again, not because he needed to, but because silence alone could easily be misunderstood. He clarified a point gently, adding a thought about how true understanding often reveals itself not through complexity, but through clarity, and how the greatest knowledge carries with it an awareness of how much remains unknown. His words did not linger on the millionaire, yet they seemed to echo inside him, stirring memories long buried. He remembered a younger version of himself, once curious, once eager to learn for the sake of learning, before ambition had narrowed his world into a relentless pursuit of dominance. The few guests exchanged glances, their expressions thoughtful rather than amused. Some felt an unexpected sense of humility rise within them, as if the exchange had implicated everyone in the room, not just the two men at its center. The millionaire sensed this collective shift and felt something tighten in his chest. He had always thrived on being admired, even envied, but now admiration had transformed into something quieter and more dangerous: respect for someone else. He attempted to speak, to offer a comment that might reframe the moment, but his mouth opened and closed without sound. Words, usually his greatest asset, had deserted him. The realization was almost surreal. He, who could command rooms with a sentence, now struggled to form even a polite response. The stranger's calm presence had not silenced him through intimidation, but through depth, through a reminder that authority derived from wealth was ultimately conditional. As seconds stretched on, the millionaire felt a subtle but profound internal reckoning. He began to understand that humiliation does not always arrive loudly or cruelly. Sometimes it comes quietly, wrapped in dignity, leaving no room for defense. He was not being judged aloud, yet he felt seen in a way that made excuses impossible. The man's answer had revealed a truth he had long avoided: that intelligence used to elevate oneself at the expense of others is hollow, and that true mastery leaves no need for spectacle. Around them, the gala continued in fragments. A waiter paused uncertainly. Music drifted faintly from another hall, but these details felt distant, irrelevant. What mattered was the realization taking shape within him, slow but undeniable. He had tried to use language to assert superiority, and instead, language had exposed the limitations of his worldview. The stranger finally inclined his head slightly, a gesture of quiet respect, signaling that he considered the exchange complete. There was no expectation of applause, no demand for acknowledgement. Yet in that simple movement, the room felt released, as if a tension it had not known it carried had suddenly loosened. A few people shifted closer, not to the millionaire, but toward the man who had spoken, drawn by an authenticity that could not be purchased or rehearsed. The millionaire watched this with a strange mixture of discomfort and clarity. He realized that the power he had relied on all his life had just been challenged, not by force or rebellion, but by wisdom expressed without fear. And standing there, surrounded by symbols of success that now felt strangely hollow, he understood that this was not a loss he could recover from with money or influence. It was a lesson, and it had left him profoundly, irrevocably silent. The moment did not end with a sharp conclusion or a dramatic declaration. Instead, it faded into the room like a tide pulling back, leaving everything subtly but permanently rearranged. The gala resumed in fragments, music rising again from hidden speakers, conversations cautiously restarting as if people were unsure which topics were still safe to touch. Yet the energy had changed. Laughter sounded softer now, more restrained, and the easy arrogance that had once floated through the hall had been replaced by something closer to reflection. The millionaire remained where he was, no longer the gravitational center of the room, but a solitary figure standing amid wealth that suddenly felt ornamental rather than empowering. He watched as the stranger moved away with unassuming grace, exchanging a few quiet words with a guest who approached him not out of obligation, but genuine interest. There was no entourage, no attempt to capitalize on the attention he had earned, and that restraint lingered in the millionaire's mind like an unanswered question. For the first time in years, he felt an unfamiliar sensation, self-awareness unshielded by confidence. He replayed the exchange again and again, each word echoing with greater clarity now that the moment had passed. What unsettled him most was not that he had been outmatched linguistically, but that he had been understood. His intent, hidden behind elegance and intellect, had been laid bare without accusation. He had asked a question to dominate, to remind the room of his superiority, and in doing so, had revealed a hunger for validation he rarely acknowledged. The realization stung, yet it also carried an unexpected weight of honesty. He recognized how often he had used intelligence as armor, wealth as proof, and control as comfort. Tonight, none of those defenses had held. The man's answer had not taken anything from him materially, yet it had stripped away an illusion he had mistaken for identity. As the evening wore on, guests approached the millionaire cautiously, offering polite remarks, attempting to restore the familiar balance of admiration. He responded automatically, nodding, smiling, speaking when required, but his words felt distant even to himself. He was no longer fully present in these interactions. His thoughts remained anchored to the exchange, to the calm dignity with which the stranger had spoken, to the effortless way he had embodied knowledge without needing to display it. At one point, the millionaire found himself standing alone near a tall window overlooking the city, its lights stretching endlessly into the darkness. He had always loved this view. It reminded him of everything he had conquered. Tonight, it felt different. The city no longer appeared as a testament to his success, but as a vast, complex world that existed entirely beyond his control. In that quiet moment, something inside him shifted. Not dramatically, not completely, but enough to matter. He acknowledged, perhaps for the first time, that respect earned through fear or humiliation was fragile, and that true influence did not need to announce itself. The stranger's presence had altered the room without effort, without command, simply by being rooted in understanding rather than ego. This realization did not fill the millionaire with resentment, as he might have expected. Instead, it stirred a reluctant admiration, followed by a deeper, more uncomfortable question. Who might he have been if he had chosen humility over dominance earlier in his life? The question lingered, unanswered, yet impossible to ignore. As the gala drew to a close and guests began to depart, the millionaire finally saw the stranger again near the exit, preparing to leave quietly, unnoticed by most. Impulsively, he stepped forward, not with the confidence that usually propelled him, but with a measured hesitation. He considered speaking, offering thanks, perhaps even an apology, but words once again failed him. The stranger noticed him and offered a small, respectful nod, nothing more. In that gesture, there was no judgment, no expectation, only acknowledgement. The millionaire returned the nod, feeling the weight of it settle into his chest. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no public confession, just a shared understanding that something meaningful had passed between them. When the doors finally closed behind the last guest, the millionaire remained for a moment longer, standing in the now quiet hall. The chandeliers still shone, the marble still gleamed, and yet the space felt different, as though it, too, had absorbed the lesson of the evening. He realized that being left speechless was not the humiliation he had feared. It was an invitation, an opening to listen rather than assert, to learn rather than dominate. As he stepped out into the night, the city air cool against his face, he carried with him not defeat, but awareness. And though no one would ever mark this evening as a turning point in headlines or history, for him, it would remain unforgettable. The night a question meant to humiliate became an answer that quietly, irrevocably changed him.